the study of language and its relation to the world is a key theme in analytic philosophy. This field investigates meaning, intentionality, reference, and other concepts related to language and thought. Gottlob Frege and Bertrand Russell were instrumental in the linguistic turn of this philosophy, which was followed by other notable figures such as Ludwig Wittgenstein and Willard van Orman Quine. In contrast, continental philosophy views language as an integral part of many other areas of thought, such as phenomenology and existentialism. Linguistic speculation has a long history, dating back to ancient Greek and Indian thinkers such as Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics. Plato argued for a natural correctness to names, while Aristotle focused on logic and meaning creation, ultimately being associated with moderate realism. The Stoics made important contributions to grammar and proposed that propositions were the only truth-bearers of language. The analysis of vagueness and ambiguity has led to an increasing interest in syncategorematic words like and, or, not, if, and every, as well as categorematic words and their properties. The doctrine of suppositio, which involves the proper and improper interpretation of a term in a specific context, has emerged as a major development in the study of language. This concept provides a precursor to modern distinctions between use and mention and between language and metalanguage. Notable scholars, including Martin of Dacia and Thomas of Erfurt, advanced this speculative grammar tradition from the 11th to 13th century. Later, linguists of the Renaissance and Baroque eras proposed the idea of a philosophical language which was influenced by the discovery of Chinese characters and Egyptian hieroglyphs. The importance of language in Western philosophy gained momentum in the early 20th century with the works of German philosopher Gottlob Frege and the publication of Ferdinand de Saussure's Cours de linguistique générale. This linguistic turn became so pervasive that it was understood to be the essence of philosophy as a whole in analytic philosophy circles. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard insisted on a conscious focus on language in Western philosophy, arguing that philosophy has not adequately acknowledged language's role in cognition. Various theories have been put forth to define the concept of linguistic meaning, each with its own set of literature. The ideational theory associates meaning with mental representations triggered by signs, popularized by John Locke. Despite facing several issues, contemporary semantic internalism has renewed interest in this theory. The truth-conditional theory defines meaning as the conditions under which an expression is true or false, with roots dating back to Frege and championed by philosophers like Tarski and Davidson. Meanwhile, Wittgenstein's use theory highlights the community's language usage. The inferentialist theory posits that expression meaning is derived from its inferential relationships with other expressions. Direct reference theory rests on the belief that an expression's reference determines its meaning. Semantic externalism suggests that meaning is at least partly determined by one's surrounding environment. Finally, pragmatic theories emphasize that understanding a sentence's meaning lies in discerning its consequences. The theme of this passage is the theories of reference in language and how philosophers have tried to understand the relationship between words and the world. Gottlob Frege's theory of mediated reference divided the semantic content of expressions into sense and reference, where the sense is an abstract, universal, and objective thought that a sentence expresses. The reference of sentences are objects in the world that words pick out, and senses determine reference. Bertrand Russell disagreed with Frege, arguing that only logically proper names such as indexicals like I are directly referential, while other expressions require description to be meaningful. Despite their differences, both philosophers are considered to be descriptivists about proper names. This theory was later criticized in Saul Kripke's Naming and Necessity. Overall, the passage explores the complexities of language and its relationship to the world through the lens of various philosophical theories. The theme of the story is the study of reference in philosophy and linguistics, with a focus on how the meaning of a sentence emerges from its parts. Kripke's arguments against Frege-Russell descriptivism and Chomsky's critique of the philosophical enterprise of studying reference are mentioned. The principle of compositionality is discussed as a means of explaining the relationship between meaning and structure in a sentence. Propositional functions are introduced as a way of describing the meaning of a sentence, and syntactic and semantic trees are contrasted as methods of understanding the relationship between the parts of a linguistic string. The intersection of philosophy of language and philosophy of mind is briefly touched upon in reference to modern psycholinguistics, with questions regarding the amount of innate language, the nature of language acquisition, and the connection between thought and language. The field of study concerning language and its relationship to the mind has several different models of understanding. Computation models focus on the logical and computational processing of a representational language of thought, while emergentist models see natural faculties as a complex system emerging from simpler biological parts. Reductionist models try to explain higher-level mental processes in terms of low-level neurophysiological activity. This field of study delves into how language is used socially and its relation to a speaker and interpreter's mind. Central topics include language learning, creation, and speech acts, as well as the concept of successful translation. The debate on the extent to which language influences thought and vice versa is another important theme. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis suggests language limits a linguistic community's thought on certain subjects. The knowledge-first position argues that thought has priority over language, while the coextensive view argues that language and thought cannot be explained without each other. Some, like Gorgias, even question language's ability to capture thought at all. Various studies have demonstrated the impact of language on human understanding of causality, perception, and categorization. For instance, Lera Boroditsky found that English speakers attribute agency to accidental events, while Spanish and Japanese speakers view them as self-caused. Similarly, Caitlin Fossey's research indicates that English speakers recall the agents of accidental events better than Spanish and Japanese speakers. Grammatical gender is another factor that shapes perception and description of gendered objects, as exemplified by German and Spanish speakers' different choices of descriptors for masculine and feminine nouns. Furthermore, Gary Lupian's experiments reveal that giving names to unfamiliar stimuli expedites their categorization and memorization. These findings illustrate the power of language in shaping how we perceive and make sense of the world around us. Language is often said to be subject to social conventions, leading to questions about the nature of these conventions and how they impact our study of language. One proposed definition of a convention is a rationally self-perpetuating regularity in behavior put forth by David Kellogg Lewis. However, this view conflicts with the Gracian view of speaker's meaning, complicating our understanding of conventions and their importance. Some have even called into question the relevance of conventions in studying language, instead favoring a focus on the internal language of individuals. Still, fields such as etymology, stylistics, and rhetoric offer insight into how social conditions give rise to meaning in language, and can be used to explore the effects of various linguistic elements. Literary theory, on the other hand, seeks to analyze the methods by which readers and critics interpret texts, and overlaps with the philosophy of language in many ways. Overall, investigating the assumptions that underpin each theoretical view is key to gaining a better understanding of the role of conventions in language. Continental philosophy views language as a fundamental aspect of various fields of thought, such as phenomenology, structural semiotics, hermeneutics, existentialism, structuralism, deconstruction, and critical theory. The theme of language is often related to that of logic, reflecting the Greek sense of logos as discourse or dialectic. Heidegger and Gadamer's hermeneutic ontology expand on this view, proposing that language is an essential medium for substantive understanding and agreement between people. According to Heidegger, speech is the most essential and pure form of language, while Gadamer argues that every language constitutes a worldview. Ricoeur's hermeneutics focuses on discovering hidden meanings in the equivocal terms of ordinary language. Semiotics, on the other hand, studies the transmission, reception, and meaning of signs and symbols in general. The focus of this passage is on the different perspectives surrounding the study of language and communication. It begins by discussing the tradition of semiotics, which views language as a sign system, and highlights important figures in this field. The passage then presents different philosophical and biological theories on language, including the idea that it is a natural phenomenon and the debate between philosophical realism and nominalism. The author provides various perspectives on how language and meaning are constructed, from considerations of intention to social construction and cultural replication. The writing style is informative and academic, with a focus on conveying complex ideas to a specialized audience. The role of formal logic in understanding natural language has been debated among philosophers, with some advocating for the use of formal languages and semantics in analyzing language, while others focusing on the practical and social aspects of language use. The so-called ordinary language philosophers emphasize the importance of studying natural language without strict adherence to truth conditions or reference. Instead, they emphasize the communicative function of language and develop theories of speech acts and pragmatics. While the division between formal and informal approaches to language analysis continues, some philosophers, like Paul Grice, have questioned the existence of conflict between logic and natural language. The issue of translation and interpretation further complicates language analysis, with some arguing for the indeterminacy of meaning and reference. For instance, in his Principle of Radical Translation, W.V. Quine argues that it is impossible to be totally certain of the meaning or reference attached to an utterance in an unfamiliar language. Donald Davidson expanded on Quine's views on radical translation to create the concept of radical interpretation, which involves understanding the utterances and actions of individuals within a single linguistic community. He argued that determining the meaning of any given sentence requires attributing meanings to all of that individual's assertions, mental states, and attitudes. The issue of vagueness in language has long troubled philosophers of language and logic, particularly in cases where borderline cases exist that make it impossible to determine the truthfulness of a predicate. Classic examples include concepts like is tall or is bald, where it is difficult to determine whether a borderline case is considered either tall or not tall. This vagueness can create the paradox of the heap, which has been tackled by a variety of different theorists using invalued logics like fuzzy logic, which diverge significantly from the traditional two-valued logics.